trials focus on it and has been the focus of much of our discussion today. And it will be as we move forward with the health of our waterways and the report card that's been given to many of the regions that we'll discuss with Emma Carlos coming up. I wanted to take a focus on the innovation and the initiatives adopted by Project Catalyst over the last 10 years. Of course, you know it's all grower-led, and of course many of the innovations come from you trialling things on farms. So I put together a bit of an overview of some of the notable and sometimes dodgy setups we have on farm. Willie Lucas, I'm referring to you and your battery. So you'll see some of that footage here today. One of the most interesting things as we explored this in the Burdekin earlier this year, because we wanted to focus on the host NRM, was that it went back so far. And we began by talking with Joe Tamer. He's a bit of a controversial figure in his own region. However, he's someone who trialled things, failed and learned from it. Not only him, but the companies who were providing services and infrastructure for him. So, without any further ado, I introduce water and irrigation.
My name is Joe Tamer. I'm from Homestead Road in Home Hill. We farm 220 hectares of sugarcane and various other crops. I've been part of Project Catalyst now since 2010. Our trials are pretty much around both soil and water. We've got a bit of a differentiation in soil types out there. In our water, we've got a bit of salt in our water. And if you look at the history with salinity in water, to grow decent crops, you need to give it a little bit more water more often rather than one big water here and there. If you can give it sparingly every second day, a little bit of water at a time, the roots can actually take the fresh water out of the salts and leave the salts behind. If you let it dry out too much, well, the roots are going to try and take the moisture out of the salts also too, and it's no good for it. So the more often that you do water the sugarcane or any other crop, the better it would be. Smaller amounts better than larger amounts.
Here's an example of just planted 10 days ago. Got our drip tape in the middle. 250 one side, we have a billet, which is germinating, and 250 the other side, we have a billet that's germinating. So this, as you can see the wetted area here, that's what that one little drip, this is a dripper. So every half a metre I have a dripper, and you can see now it's just starting to drip out. Yeah, it's only a dribble, so it puts out a litre per hour. Hard thing for us to get our head around because we're used to flood irrigating. We look at the ground when it's mud, we know it's finished irrigating. Whereas with the drip, you can be more precise, but you can also be precisely wrong. So, and yeah, we're learning all the way. It's roughly 2 hectares of drip tape that I'm putting in here, and I've got 2 hectares of flood irrigation, which I'm using over here. We're going to compare all the information, the inputs and the outputs, and just see what the yield is like, and the energy use, the water use, and any other benefits or pros or cons, and put it down on a piece of paper so we can come up with a scenario and a business case scenario of the proper results in the same block. So compared apples with apples. We've been involved in drip irrigation for about 25 years at least now. We grow a lot of small crops, and that's where we went in the initial days, and we knew definitely that for sugarcane it was going to make a major difference in our particular problem area. We had a few issues with depth, water soaking, wasn't soaking the right way towards the sugarcane, it was soaking down, it was going away from the sugarcane. We didn't really work very successful, so hence the following year we went to a bed situation with the dual row sugarcane on both sides. We put the drip irrigation smack in the middle of it, about level where the sugarcane sticks were. That way the water got to it, and it worked very successful actually. We did get a very successful strike and a very good crop. In fact, the records show we got a 60% increase in productivity above and beyond the conventional way, planted pretty much at the same time.
Definitely, it keeps the grasses down because it's all centralised to one particular part rather than flood irrigating. Flood irrigating, obviously, filling the whole area up with water, which encourages a lot of plant growth. So yes, it's been chemicals, fertilisers and water. There's been a reduction in that. There may be a little bit of increase in electricity price because of the extra pressure you need in there, but we can wear that.
Was producing around 3,500 to 4,000 tonnes of cane, roughly, and now we're up to around 9, and I think pretty sure we can get better. The biggest improver of our yield has been the drip system installed on 42 hectares. That's been one of the major increases of yield for us. With this computer, I've got it all linked up to my irrigation sets, my pump, my variable speed control for saving energy, and it's all been hooked onto the internet, and I can monitor it from wherever I am in the world. I can set up automated irrigation sets. I can fertilise through it, and importantly, I can monitor. This is a moisture probe readout of what's been happening over the current period, and I can monitor that and adjust my irrigation sets accordingly.
Initially, we were very, very hyped up about this whole thing here, and obviously it worked very, very well for the first year. I promoted also to green cane harvest. By leaving the trash on the ground means it blocks all the grasses out. You need less chemicals, you need also there too. The water itself doesn't dehydrate as fast, so you're using a little bit less water also at the same time. The trash can break down and create its own fertiliser over a period of time. That was fantastic, great. And also the main thing was to try and keep the surrounding areas clear, so you couldn't harbour insects and rats and various things that can harm that drip irrigation. That worked quite well the first year, until we cut the sugarcane. Once we cut the sugarcane, we cut it green, we left the trash on the ground. Unfortunately, we created the nest, the breeding ground within the field instead. And by the next season, we'd changed something like probably 12 to 1,400 fittings. We had to put joiners in the middle of the field because they were all eaten, and finding them was just a tremendous task for the starters. Never really ever got to do it 100% properly. There's just too many there, so the crop ultimately suffered for the next year. So what I encourage people to do is, but everyone may have a slight different situation, they might not have as many pests within the region, is burn the sugarcane, and drip irrigation will work a treat.
When I first took over this farm in 2005, it was standard practice, all the old school ways. And with my background coming from the horticulture industry, proactive and progressive, and moving to the cane industry, it's a bit of a sort of well, this farm particularly was, very stuck in its ways, and I straight away, couldn't understand a lot of why they were doing some of the things they were doing. So I started making changes, and all the people driving past were thinking I was mad. And this is a little sprinklers trial we've got going on our farm. We're just trialling a different form of irrigation. This irrigation system's been developed by Jamie Jurgens. He also runs a cane farm in Bloomsbury, and this setup, and they've got 160 hectares down there set up working of this sprinkler overhead irrigation in cane, solid set. It's been working quite successfully in Bloomsbury as a supplementary irrigation, and that's why we've brought it to the Burdekin to try it, because the Burdekin's fully irrigated. We've got to get a lot more water on just to try it and see how it goes. And so far it's looking promising. We've had one crop under this system so far, and this will be the second planting. I had a few issues with the first crop, as you do with something new, but yeah, I think we're ironing the bugs out of it, and especially in some of this really sandy soil that doesn't like to soak, and odd-shaped paddocks, which this is a really odd-shaped block, it might have a place. What led me to investigating using trickle in cane is we've got some blocks that are not good flood blocks. They really should never have been flood irrigation. They got too much fall, and you can't get the water to soak. The crops weren't very good in these particular blocks, and yeah, with my horticulture background, I had a bit of an idea of what trickle could do. So yeah, we started investigating and looking into giving it a go. We've certainly picked up the yield in these particular blocks, between 20 to 30% over what they were doing in the past history. Trickle, you have no runoff, so there's absolutely no water leaving the farm as irrigation runoff. When we first started with the drip irrigation, we were doing standard verticum practice of burning before harvest. Because we can't, in this sandy soil, we can't get the water to soak to the surface with the drip. The bed was baking in the sun, and the ratoons weren't getting away. So yeah, we bit the bullet, and probably now it's been about at least three years we've been trash blanketing every year, and massive benefit in weed control. It helps greatly.
I am full flood irrigation. I started using IrrigWeb, an irrigation management tool for scheduling 3-4 years ago. Since then I religiously use it, so it basically takes in all the meteorological data from the local weather station on Inkerman, maps it with cane yield, and then gives you the precise time to water. I love it. I love technology and things like that, so I've always sort of been ahead of it in that side of things. So yeah, I fully use IrrigWeb. My next step is automation. So once I'm involved in a project that's with NESP, it's called NESP. Don't ask me what the acronym stands for. So it is all about getting the IrrigWeb to talk to the automation software. So then there's no longer human in there saying, all right, water, and then the automation will do the whole cycle, and then you turn it off. Anyway, that's still many years away. I'm still doing a lot of infrastructure on the farm because Dad was pretty old school how we used to do everything. So yeah, I've got a long way to go before I get there.
We used to be high water use. In 15 years, we used to use 45 megs a hectare. So the changes we've gone is from full cultivation down to part cultivation, and then which involved, we used to cultivate only plant and first ratoons. Then we've gone into minimum cultivation, and now we've gone back to cultivating when we need to, and that's at a very minimal. That's normally when it's cut in the wet. It was to use less water was one of our biggest challenges. As I said before, we used 45 megalitres a hectare 15 years ago. We've reduced that down to 15 megalitres over going to minimum tillage and things like that. But I still got a big problem. I want to bring it down to 10 megs. That's what I'd like to bring it to. And that's my challenge at this stage, so that we get hardly any water going into the underground. And I've got another one that's on heavy clays, and so we get minimum runoff. Actually, we would like to bring it to nearly nothing in irrigation terms. We can see the nutrients and pesticides and things like that are definitely must be leaving the farm. So if we can cut our water use down, it's got to solve that problem. I want to keep it on my farm. I don't see the sense in wasting it. I want to be able to use every drop, every gram of fertiliser I put on. I want all them to be used on my farm, not on someone else's farm. We've done huge amounts of laser levering. We've cut 7 blocks into 1 block. Then we've shortened that block into half and created less runs, and that's all to do with getting water down at an efficient time. And adding all that laser levelling with this new automated telemetry, I think we're going to be on a win situation.
Okay, sourcing the automation equipment's been quite challenging. A big part of this process was trying to get something that was low cost. One of the big problems that they've been talking about is getting the signal through the cane. As you can see, the density of the cane poses an issue with any radio frequencies. We're currently working on some different systems to try and build a complete unit. We start off back at the farmhouse or the shed with a base station. So each installation will require its own base station, which is connected to internet. From there we have a big base antenna which will communicate down to the paddock. Down in the paddock we'll have a field module located at each butterfly valve and at each pump so they can do the controlling. Down in the paddock itself we're looking at trying to install field sensors or end of row sensors which need to be located in the paddock for a number of years and live up to our harsh environments.
The expected outcome will be that I will definitely get some sleep at night. We'll have no runoff to the reef. Our labour costs will come down. And the whole story of it all is it will be very good for business and very good for lifestyle.
Our next speaker, a regional approach to keeping score on the health of our waterway. So Emma Carlos is going to be presenting this for us. Emma holds a PhD in ecology and has worked in research roles from Southern Australia to Northern Queensland, which means that's taken her across temperate, arid and tropical ecosystems. So for the past 2 years, Emma has worked as the technical officer for the Healthy Rivers to Reef Partnership, coordinating the integration of science and data to produce the last 2 Mackay Whitsunday Waterway Health report cards. So please welcome Emma.
Thanks very much. Righto. So it's a real privilege to be here. I really thank the organisers very much for inviting me. I have to admit that I'm equally parts impressed and scared by the number of faces in the room. It's very impressive, the commitment by you guys to being here. So today, excuse me, I'll be giving you an overview of our Mackay Whitsunday's report cards and report cards in general. So I've put a couple of these report cards on the tables for you to have a look at. The report card is supported by, or the production of the report card is supported by the Healthy Rivers to Reef Partnership. The partnership, for short, because it's much easier just to say that, is a collective group of 23 members who have come from our local governments or across all of our governments, research organisations, all our industries in the Mackay Whitsunday region. So that includes cane growers, mining, ports, our tourism industry. We have community representatives and we also have traditional owner representatives as well. So they've all come together with the one clear objective, which is to support the production of a report card. Since the establishment of the partnership in 2014, we've produced 3 report cards. I don't know if that's impressive or not, but for me it's very early days for our partnership. And contained within our report cards, what we actually report on is environmental condition data, which includes from our freshwaters, our estuaries and our marine environments. But we also include stewardship data from across the majority of our industries in our region, so not just agriculture, it also includes ports, heavy industry, tourism and the urban sector. And where we can, we like to include as much information on the social and economic values of the community as well. So you might ask, some of you, well, I don't know how many people are actually familiar with the regional report card compared to the Great Barrier Reef wide report card, and you might ask, why are we doing a regional report card when there's already a reef-wide one? Now, the reef-wide one obviously covers a much greater area, so it reports based on NRM regions, whereas our report card obviously a lot smaller region, and we start to get a much more localised information on the condition of our waterways. It's important to go to this regional scale when we consider I guess, the land uses within our different NRM regions. This is just one overview of how land use can actually have a different contributing factor to one of our indicators, which is DIN. So this graph here, we've just got an indication of DIN loads on the left-hand axis, so the y-axis. I was sitting right at the back before, so I'm pretty sure no one can actually read this at all. So along the bottom there are the NRM regions, starting from Cape York to the left, Wet Tropics, Burdekin, Mackay Whitsunday, Fitzroy and the Burnett Merry the furthest to the right, and then the different colours are basically the proportion of DIN contribution from the different land uses. And I didn't want to dwell too much on it other than to say that you can see there are actually differences between regions. The red is where the sugarcane land use is the contributor of the DIN. The dark green is actually where nature conservation is the contributor of the DIN. And the grazing is represented by orange. So if you look at the spread of those colours, it is quite different depending on your region. So we need to have a better regional understanding of the different land uses, the industries that are actually acting to put pressure on our waterways. This is probably my favourite slide, so enjoy it, it's really pretty. Graphical representation of the Mackay Whitsunday region and the land uses and industries in there. If you start far to the left on the land in the catchments, obviously we've got our agricultural sectors. Primarily the sugarcane is focused in the south of our region, but there's also hotspot around Proserpine as well. And as you move further north, we come across our grazing sector. Our report card also includes the Don Basin. So that around the Bowen area, we also start to come across horticulture in that region. When we move further towards the coast, that's where we start to encounter some of our bigger urban centres like Mackay and also Proserpine. And then off the coast, we're seeing the ports, the tourism industry, the shipping and commercial and recreational fishing. So they all have a role to play in the impact on the pressures that they put on our waterways in different locations. And that's why it's important to actually get a picture at the regional scale as localised as we really can on the condition of our waterways. So within our report card, what we do is we separate the environments into freshwater, estuaries and the marine environment, and we actually separate that even further and have inshore and offshore marine environments. And we report on the condition of our waterways by assessing water quality, habitats, hydrology and fish. So we try and get a broad spectrum. It's not just about water quality. We actually want to know what's going on in the habitats as well. And then to present this information, to present the condition score, we summarise the information into an overall A to E score, so your basic school report card, where A is good, E not so good, colour code it to try and make it easier to read, and then present it in these circles, or what we like to affectionately call beer coasters, and I think everyone can relate to that. And in the middle we've got our overall grade, and on the outside we actually have segments sort of representing what the actual indicators are measuring. So across our freshwater and estuarine environments and into our marine environments, we obviously look at water quality. Sediments, nutrients and pesticides go into that water quality wedge up there. We also measure fish on the, across that scale as well, but at the moment we only have data in our freshwater systems to report on that. We're moving into reporting on our marine systems as well. The biggest difference that you might see here is the bottom of the circles, and the wedge there is actually around our habitats and how we measure the freshwater compared to the marine a little bit differently. Probably self-explanatory. Coral is in the marine environment, seagrass is in the marine environment. So in our freshwaters and estuaries, we start to look at riparian extent, wetland extent, mangrove extent if we're actually in the estuaries, and also our in-stream habitats. So this is actually having a look at fish barriers, the amount of impoundment through our freshwater systems. So where there's a lot of water resource development, we have a lot of dams, and it really changes, obviously, the habitat in the stream for the biota there. Before I move into the actual condition scores from the report card that I've popped on your tables, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of how we actually score water quality. I wanted to do this because for those of you who are familiar with the GBR-wide report card, actually a little bit different. The GBR-wide report card looks at estimated loads that are sent into the marine environment, and that's an estimation based on modelling or with including improvements of land management practice. Our regional report card actually doesn't use estimated loads. We look at concentrations of some of our water quality indicators. So we take data from existing monitoring programs. There's a lot of them within our region. The Paddock to Reef program, the end of catchment loads monitoring is just one of the programs that we use. We also use data from the ports monitoring and our own monitoring within the estuaries that have been implemented since the report card started. So we actually summarise that data into an annual figure for the particular indicator that we're interested in. So for example, DIN. And in our freshwaters, that summary figure is a median. And then we compare that to the Queensland legislated guideline for DIN for the particular site we're interested in. And that might not mean a hell of a lot to you, and I'm hoping that a picture tells 1,000 words here, but we'll see how we go. What I've got here is just dummy figures with an indication of concentration on your left here. The dots, the different coloured dots, pretend figures of your annual concentration that's been summarised, so maybe a median for DIN. And the line in the middle is just a dummy of your guideline value, perhaps for DIN. So the way we score it is that if our annual concentration is actually lower than our guideline, then it would score a good. And depending on how much lower than the guideline, depends on whether it scores very good. On the flip side, if it's higher than the guideline, it would score a moderate through to very poor. And depending on how much higher than the guideline it is, so that distance is a lot bigger, it depends on whether it scores a poor or a very poor. Now, the important thing to take home with this is that this approach doesn't actually remove the impacts of climate. It also doesn't remove the time lags associated with improved land management practices. And that is an important thing to bear in mind, because it might mean that we're doing a lot of effort on the land, like exactly what you guys are doing, but we might not see the changes in our report card scores for some time after that has been implemented. So for pesticides, that can be years, and for sediments and nutrients, that can be up to decades. So it is something to bear in mind that we will have time lags between improving our land management and it actually being shown in this report card. The GBR report card actually is able to remove those factors and gives us an estimate of what we would actually be looking at in terms of load reductions because of your land management improvements. So I thought that was important just so that it gives you a bit of context for when we have a look at these results. This is the results for our 2016 report card, which I've got on the table. It's our most recent report card. It doesn't actually cover the period of Cyclone Debbie. That'll be our next report card. So just bear that in mind as we have a look at this. Now, for our more southern section of the region, where the Mackay Centre is, we've got the Plain and Pioneer Basin. And what we were showing in the 2016 report card is that water quality and our habitats were particular issues around our Plain Basin. Water quality issues were primarily driven from DIN and pesticides is actually a hotspot in Mackay. And for the first time, we've found that in our central inshore region, which is this coaster down the bottom here, we found that the pesticide score for that region actually dropped from good to moderate for the very first time. If we move over to the Pioneer Basin, the coaster up the top, we find that water quality is in slightly better condition. It's in moderate condition. However, that bottom wedge down the bottom is habitats, and it's showing that habitats are also in poor condition in our Pioneer Basin. And that might be reflective of the fact that the Mackay Urban Centre is sitting in the Pioneer Basin. Obviously, I was saying before, there's a lot of water resource development, so this changes the in-stream habitat conditions for our in-stream biota like fish. And there's also a lot more roads in addition to what we would normally have in a normal sort of agricultural landscape, and that can cause a lot of extra fish barriers. So that poorer habitat score is also being driven by the urban centre. Moving further north, we move up into the more Whitsunday area. This is where we start to shift towards a little bit more grazing, particularly in the O'Connell Basin. Yeah, that's right, I was just thinking, where's the O'Connell Basin? I cut it off, look, it's gone. Anyway, sorry O'Connell. The water quality actually starts to look a lot better when we get to the O'Connell Basin. And unfortunately, we don't have any data yet for the Proserpine and Don Basin, so these top wedges around the circle are actually in grey, which means we don't have the data. That may actually, or it will actually change in the report cards to come, because there's been an establishment of a long-term monitoring station in the Proserpine and Don rivers, so we're really looking forward to seeing what the condition scores actually turn out with our new data. However, when we move into our Whitsunday's marine zone, so down the bottom, we actually find that water quality is in poor condition in the Whitsundays. And this is in spite of a good condition for coral, which has gone up just a little bit since the last report card, and that might sound quite contradictory. But what we'll actually see within our coral scores is that indicators that are related to coral resilience aren't doing quite as well as we would like. That, coupled with our poor water quality, was suggesting that after severe disturbance there might be some issues with coral recovery. So it'll be really telling in our next few report cards post-Cyclone Debbie to see how the coral does actually recover, given that it's got the extra pressure of water quality here. Before I wrap up, I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the other information that we report on. So I mentioned earlier that we report on the industry stewardship, and we do cover the majority of our industries. We're still working to develop a commercial fishing industry stewardship report, but I did want to just highlight the agricultural sector, given our target audience. So we have three main agricultural industries in our region: sugarcane, grazing and horticulture, but that's restricted into that Don Basin area. And what we found in our last report card was that we actually only had improvement in land management practice in the sugarcane industry for our region compared to grazing and horticulture. It was a modest increase of 2% of cane under best practice management for soil and pesticides, but it is indicating that in this particular case, the sugarcane industry is that step ahead potentially from the grazing or horticulture. So our partnership is really committed to increasing our understanding of our condition of our entire region. You will have noticed that there were many grey segments throughout those coasters that I'd put up here, or if you couldn't see it, you might have looked at the report card on your table if it's too far away. And the partnership are committed to filling in those data gaps, which is including investigating how to report on marine and estuarine fish, investigating how we can report on the condition of our freshwater flows. And quite a standout for our partnership was that we had no data whatsoever in terms of the condition of our southern inshore region. If you do check out the report card, it's actually a completely grey beer coaster. So the partnership have worked to establish monitoring for coral, water quality and seagrass in that region for the very first time last year. We're also working towards improving our understanding of industry stewardship, so within agriculture but also our other industries. We try and incorporate some citizen science where we can, and the partnership is supportive of any research projects that need to be undertaken to help us get a bit of a better understanding of what's going on and what the report card actually reveals. So this is a very nice picture of the Solway Lass tall ship, and I've put that in there because since the poor water quality was shown up in our 2016 report card, the partnership have really been proactive in getting an in-situ monitoring data logger established on this partner's tourism boat, and in partnership with CSIRO and AIMS, they're actually looking a lot further and a lot deeper into what's actually causing that poor water quality around the Whitsunday region. And of course, the next question is, okay, so what? What does all this mean if we're not going to do anything about it? And that's the partnership's next question. In March, we're actually holding a forum for our partnership to investigate the management priorities for our partners and for our region. We're going to take information from the report cards. We're going to take information around the targets that have been set within our local and our statewide water quality improvement plans and overlay where the priorities actually overlap and provide that platform for partners to actually look at how they can influence the results of the report card. Thank you. That is all.
No running away. Emma, back up there. There'll be questions.
Oh, yeah.
You can't escape that quickly. She was off like a rocket. Oh, come on, don't let me down.
What intervals do you expect the report card?
Yeah, you come back.
Oh, sorry. It is supposed to be an annual report card. So far, we've released one every year since 2015. We are looking to potentially, I guess, decrease the time lag behind the release of the data and the release of the report card, because at the moment we don't release our report cards for about 18 months until after the most recent data that was captured inside it. So if we do move to decreasing that time lag, we may have to skip a report card, but at this stage we haven't decided 100% either way, but once we've done that it'll still be an annual thing. Yep.
You mentioned the cane BMP on a couple of slides back. So that was just an improvement in the stewardship in the report card. So the more land that was under cane BMP had a direct impact on the score on the report card. Is that right?
Yeah, so that slide, our industry stewardship for agriculture is taken directly from paddock to reef and how they assess the best management and practice adoption. So when there is an uptake of BMP, that also feeds into paddock to reef assessments, and then we take that straight into our report card. So you're right, yes.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so now it's my turn to fire questions at Emma. But no, I guess this talk, and it was great that Emma could come along and give this talk, because people have been saying, you know, the data we collect and you know, what's the government basing its opinions on and that sort of thing. So where does this data go? Okay, it looks pretty in the little booklets, but, you know, you're generating it for an audience. Who are the audience you're generating it for? Who do you expect will actually read it? Because that's, you know, we collect a lot of data and often people wonder what happens with it. So you're collecting a pretty report. Who reads it?
Oh, you asked the age-old question. So we really battle with how we can actually target our report card a little bit better. At the moment, we try to be as broad as we can in terms of putting it out there to make it readable for the whole community. So that includes cane growers, that includes the tourism industry who like to use it to, I guess, give them standing when they request more uptake from governments in our region. We like to use it to inform our schools, our younger generation, in terms of where we're actually sitting for condition and how that our different industries are actually playing a role in improving that as well. So it's a really good question. I think because we have such a range of partners, pretty much from every industry across our region, we try to be as broad as we can. So if there are aspects within a report card that we could, I guess, target a little bit better to you guys or for school children, we like to take on that sort of information so that we can continuously make improvements, because as I said right at the start, I like to think we're still in very early days with only 3 down. We like to think we've got a long way to go in terms of making improvements. So.
Excellent. So the NRMs actually use these types of documents as well, and we cover 3 NRM regions here. So we'll start with Michael Boland. Where's he hiding? Okay. You get this sort of information and you're dealing with growers and helping improve practices in the region. How do you use this sort of information?
Well, a recent example would be we actually had Emma come to our Cane Regional Working Group meeting, which was really beneficial because our Cane Regional Working Group could see from Emma how our report was being developed. And we do have representation from the cane industry in the Healthy Rivers to Reef Partnership. So probably buy-in is the biggest benefit we have from our NRM region. And also with discussions with the Healthy Rivers to Reef Partnership, we can capture some of those practices that Paddock to Reef doesn't capture. So we know we're doing a lot of good things, but we've got the opportunity to build a better story and a better local story, and more of that extension emphasis and what farmers are actually doing can be developed probably as better indicators than what we've got at the moment.
I think that's interesting about that buy-in. That's why these partnerships are, I guess, made up of stakeholders who have an interest in it. So let's jump to the Burdekin, because everything's bigger and better in the Burdekin. So Luke will tell us far more about how they use their report in, helping improve the situation in the region. You don't need a microphone.
So I guess the way it works nice anyway is all reef investment goes through Paddock to Reef. So everything we do with farmers, we sign up contracts with them and report benchmarking questions, which we refer to as the 17 questions. And essentially what we try to do with those questions is benchmark where farmers are prior to engaging with us, and then measure the success really of the projects that they're involved in for the duration of the contract. So we then filter that information onto state government. It's all anonymous at the end of the day, and all identifiable information is removed from the data. And we provide it to the modelers, where it's then input into the model, and we try and better inform, utilise that data to gauge how we're tracking according to the 2050 reef plan. So the reef targets, in particular, looking at dissolved inorganic nitrogen, PS2 herbicides in the Burdekin, and sediment in grazing. So, but in sugarcane, we're specifically looking at nutrient. There's a strong focus on that, as well as PS2 herbicides. Anything else?
Oh, no. I think you covered it all. You used all the big words. Talking about some of those big words, I guess it's hard for everybody in the room to understand the importance of this data until you see those sorts of graphs and nice pretty colours. We all like colours or pictures or that sort of thing as an easy way of representing it. Nobody reads the 2050 document. Nobody, even the people who write it, I'm sure they don't read it again because it's not easy to read. But, when you put it down as colour changes going from green to orange, okay, that's an area of priority that we've got to focus on. These stories filter back to government, whether it's state or federal, and they make funding decisions for the sorts of projects that Project Catalyst has been successful in getting funding for, based on these sort of pictures. So while it looks like it is produced for a school project, don't be offended by that, please, Emma.
Not at all.
You've got to make it simple for politicians. It's not in the room. Because, well, they're using that to talk to their stakeholders. And we've got to remember that not everybody is educated in water quality. We've got to remember that not everybody has a good understanding of the environment. And so when you break it down and go, this has gone to red, it's an area we've got to focus on, it's easy for them to then throw a bucket of money at it and buy some votes. Let's talk to Michael Waring. He's got his head down because he's worried about what I'm going to ask him. Well, he kept saying it should be Bart that talks, and which. Oh, he ran away, did he? Okay. So how do you use it in your region? Obviously, you got a good score up there saying the natural environment's what's making you look bad. If we go back to that slide about second one in, the one that, the natural environment was terrible. It's mucking up your numbers. So how do you counteract that? Are you going to clear it all and turn it into cane farms?
Probably won't comment on that. Personally, we don't use it, and that's from my job. Terrain as an organisation, I'm sure, do use it, but I don't, my job is just purely catalyst. But I see it as a really valuable tool in measuring where we were at and any steps that we make forward, or I think somebody said before, if there's like if it goes from green back to orange, well, something's going wrong, we need to address that. But as far as catalyst goes, I think it's just a way of measuring where we're, showing that we are going forward, and I think catalyst is a part of that going forward. I mean, we're definitely not all of it, but we're definitely part of it. Unless Bart's got something to say if he hasn't run too far away. Oh, here he is. I'll pass it to Bart now.
I was just going to add one more thing. I guess one of the other benefits of the report card is that it's not just the cane industry or the, agricultural industry that are, the drivers behind it. You've got the tourism industry, you've got local government, you've got ports. Everyone else has a role in water quality as well. And I guess the point also behind the report card is saying, well, the whole of the community's got a responsibility for, maintaining or improving water quality. So that was all my addition, Craig.
That was huge. That was good. Thank you. No, but you're right. It's the whole of the community's problem. It's amazing how people can extract out of these documents that it's all sugarcane. To me, it says the whole of the community's got to change practices to help protect water quality or help protect other aspects of the environment. So, hands up in the room who, before it was put on the table, had ever looked at one of these report cards? Put your hand down if you're not a cane farmer. Yeah, okay. So, how do we extract things from those sort of reports that feed back to you that what's happening in this room and has been happening over 10 years is making a benefit? How do we do it? If you don't have any monitoring, the numbers look good.
I will look at that. I will work with Catchment Solutions. We'll have that information and look at that for you.
Sorry, I'm stunned.
It's the first time you haven't said anything. Yeah, you are.
I'm stunned. That's good. I like that. Save me, Emma.
You said I was going to have a panel.
Yeah, they're the panel. They're scattered out around here. We're working. Oh, I just want you left up there by yourself.
Yeah.
You're in the spotlight. I didn't want to take away your 15 minutes of fame.
Well, I've done my 15 minutes. I'm right.
Well,
yeah.
That's the problem. That we can't have all the data we need all the time. There's gaps. We're finding, and as Emma said, it's continuous improvement. And that's what we're here doing. We're improving the practices that are happening on cane farms. We can't do everything right tomorrow. It's an evolution. It's a process we have to go on. But at least if there's report cards that are highlighting where change is happening, then hopefully the story gets out there to the general public that vote in the politicians that put the money towards the programs, that things are slowly changing. Then we will offset the doom and gloom that we normally hear in the media. Where do you think the report card could go in the future? It's a fairly hard copy document at the moment. Do you see it as an interactive, for want of a better term, an application?
Well, at the moment we also have a web product that's already interactive in terms of you can look across the 3 report cards, the information, you can drill down into the data to a much finer detail, so you actually get to those DIN concentration scores, and you can actually have a look at that. I think it would be really nice to actually have a lot more up-to-date data in feeding into our website product in the future. I think that's a little way off, but it's certainly something that our partners are pretty keen to pursue, having more real-time information for everyone to use rather than that 18 months time lag between report cards. I think that's probably one of our biggest priorities moving forward. We also are looking at, I guess it's that transition into the so what. So we've got this condition report card, but we also want to start to look at how are we actually progressing to meeting our targets at a local scale. That's sort of where the GBR report card sits now, is it's looking at those progress to targets. And we would like to potentially move into that space too. So our Partners Forum in March will start to begin those conversations of what the partnership's role actually is in terms of tracking that sort of progress. So I guess there's a lot of things I could go on. We have like a list of 23 different projects that we want to get going to help improve the report card as it stands now, let alone where the research projects would need to be, or where the actual on-ground management would need to be. But essentially our partnership is always evolving, and there's, those 2 top priorities in terms of getting up-to-date data is really up there for us.
Well, talking about one of your partners, Matt, you're not going to get away scot-free. How do you as an industry partner, I guess, in this reporting system, how do you use the information and what benefit do you see?
Thanks, Craig. Reef report cards. I've actually read all of the reef report cards and the data that sits behind them because that's part of my role. Now, it's not very exciting sometimes, you're sort of digging through it, but it's part of what you have to do. Look, report cards from my point of view, they report back against the water quality targets that were set. They identify practice change. For cane, it's about practice change, it's about dissolved inorganic nitrogen, it's about PS2 herbicides, diuron, hexazinone, amitrin. Now it's 2 more, I can't think of them, and sediment. But over time they show trends, and then those trends is what we can start to think about and act on. But they provide a snapshot of the water quality outcomes in each region, and again, that's where we can target those actions, where we can then demonstrate some change in activities that can go towards those water quality targets, which we then can, over time, talk about, put our good story back into the media and demonstrate the things that we're doing to manage those challenges and pressures that come across our industry. The frustrating part about report cards is that, I know probably for Emma as well, they're always a trade-off between form and function. You have to have diagrams and tables and brief summaries to outline what the model says about water quality outcomes based on practice change that's been modelled in a very complex system that is probably hard to condense into 3 or 4 pages. So it's a really, really difficult job to do. And there's a tremendous amount of work, information and data that sits behind all these report cards. And as we've heard, there's 18 months time lag to actually, first of all, get the data in and understand what's in it, and then interpret it and report it like this. Do growers use them? Not many that I talk to use them. Unfortunately, they don't. But they do get used as in the representation of the regional working groups and at that level. So they do get talked about there. But specifically growers that I talk to go, yep, I've seen a report card. Mainly they look at the graphic and they look at the letter in it and going, have I done well this year, or am I going to get some beat up by the media? And I suppose from my point of view, that's where I have to engage and be part of that. You generally don't get all the context or the detail that sits behind them because the growers don't have time to dig into it, or they're not that interested to dig into it, and that's fair enough. They're busy growing sugarcane. But that doesn't mean they don't have value. And that's the important part about this, because it does show the trends. Now, do I use them? Yes, I do use them. It's part of my role. It allows me to understand where the pressure points are, and particularly it's around dissolved inorganic nitrogen and chemicals, but mainly fertiliser and DIN, and that's what we focus on. But also that's where the media come into it, because that's usually what happens at the time the report card comes out. There's a bit of media around it, and that's where my couple of weeks after these things come out get pretty busy understanding what's going on. Having said that, there's some really good news stories in here. And the nice thing about report cards is that it allows our industry to tell our story, because our story is important, but there's good data underpinning our story. And that's the bit I think we can all work on. It allows us to set the record straight, it allows us to get out there and say, this is what we're doing, and here's the data underpinning it. And we can also identify where we need a bit more work and more support, which we then can lobby for more support and funding to do these sort of things. How would I do it differently? I don't know. It's a really, really tough thing. I'm not sure how I'd do it differently, but I think it's important to have really good science communicators talking about these report cards. Technology's there. Maybe you could have a report card with a little QR code that you take a thing on your phone and gives you more information about that specific thing you're interested in, which ties back to the report. Maybe that's something you could do, if people are interested in it. Everyone's got a smartphone. Everyone's connected to the web.
Is that what that is?
Hey?
Is that what that is?
Which is that? I don't know.
At the back?
What is that? Where?
Is that a QR code?
Yeah, that's what that is. Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet.
There you go. Look at that.
I obviously didn't have a
A QR code, that's what that is, yeah. So, you see, I read that really closely to even notice that. That's all from me, thanks.
Okay, so we've got a question from our MC for this evening. So, let's see if he's on target already. Let's see how he's going.
God, you put me on the spot. No, mine's not a question. It's just a perception from where I sit as a grower. As you see here, we've got a report card in Catalyst of some very wonderful things, some great outcomes. But they don't have that effect out there in the public that they should be getting. But everybody that's sort of half anti or anything, or green or black or blue, will look at that report card and say, oh, look at those cane farmers. Now, whether it's, no matter what it has to do with nutrients, it's the cane farmers. Now, what I'd like to ask is, I've got a big recycling pit on my property. And not only do I recycle all my own water, I probably handle 4,000 or 5,000 hectares above me. Now, I run 2 irrigation pumps continuously to stop it going over the wall. What I say is, if my fish and my live birds and ducks and geese and everything else are happy in that pond of water, how can that be affecting that reef if it gets over the wall? Now, my report card, I wouldn't know what it was. But the point is that we're getting no benefit as growers from the wonderful things that we are doing. They don't have a fraction of the impact that that report has. And really speaking, in some terms, you start to drive people away from trying to be innovative and more sustainable and do things better. Because that report card tells us we're not going anywhere really fast. We make a slighted benefit. But we've been banging here for 10 years in Catalyst. There's a two-edged wedge here. It's perception you've got to deal with. And I don't think we get the same equivalent of exposure as Catalyst growers as what that report gets.
Last question, if there's going to be one more.
Hi, it's Tony Pajaya. I'll go a little bit further. School kids, Mr. and Mrs. John Smith that live in Civvy Street, do they see this? Or do they care? Or should we be educating our kids at school to educate mum and dad? Because, you know, there's a lot of toilets getting flushed out there. and we get the effect of it?
In terms of the school kids section, we are actually trying to work towards getting, I guess, more user-friendly educational materials around the report card. So that exact, I guess, issue that you're talking about, we can actually start to get it into our school children, who then do feed it up to the mum and dad, and it's them who's teaching mum and dad. So I think you make a really, really good point there. And it's definitely one of our partnerships flags that they're looking down that avenue as well.
And I guess before the microphone's taken away from me... Oh, the MC's upset. The next report, Emma, it's probably going to look terrible, isn't it? Because Debbie did Queensland. And... well, I'm not discriminating against regions. She had an effect up and down the coast. The figures are probably going to go backwards before they go forwards. That doesn't mean we should stop and give up, does it?
No, not at all. Funnily enough, Debbie's my mum's name. Thanks, Craig.
Apologies, Debbie.
But I think it's one of the things that we do need to consider with particularly the way that we do our regional report cards, is that we don't take out that influence of climate, so it does have an impact on potentially changing the scores a little bit. But the thing is, I guess that's what the environment or the biota are coping with at that given time. So it may have an influence, and it probably will, particularly when we start looking at our coral condition. But there's recovery as well, and it's the long-term trends that we want to look at. So if it's a dip in a score but it recovers, that's more what we're interested in, rather than one dip in a score for 1 year. So I think Matt highlighted that a bit more clearly than I did, so appreciate that. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, we're looking at the long-term trends, so we'll see what happens after the next couple of report cards.
Thanks so much for that, Emma. Yes.
Thank you, Sally, for that introduction. And it's been such a wonderful day. Well, certainly in my opinion, it's been such a wonderful day. And one of the things I wanted to reflect on is that this is the 10th year of Project Catalyst. You would have seen on the front of your magazine that we talk about 10 years, but I think it's worth spending a bit of time just to reflect on that. I was with WWF when the project started. I wasn't involved with it. Some of the growers who first came on board 10 years ago are still with us, and some of them are with us here in the room today. Who would have thought 10 years ago that it would have grown from 18 or 19 growers in one region to the number of people we have in this room today? So I think it's a great testament to those involved in the project that it has grown to such a great extent, and I'd like to really thank those growers that have come on board 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 5 years ago, but also there are some growers here today who this may well be their first forum, so I'd like to welcome them along as well, and I hope that the relationship that we've had with so many growers over the last 10 years, we will have with you over the next 10 years. So, 10 years of Project Catalyst, I think that's a really wonderful thing to reflect on. I'd also like to thank our keynote presenters. We do, at the forum, spend a lot of time talking about trial results, but it's really important, I think, to also look at the big picture. So with Brian Granshaw, Ken Anthony and Emma Carlos, we've heard about innovation, we've heard about the Reef Report Card, we've heard about the health of the reef. And it helps to connect what we're doing here today, but also what you're doing on your farms with the bigger picture, reef health, the productivity of the industry and the like. So thank you very much to those keynote speakers. You've also had your homework. Thank you to Craig for pressing everyone to fill in those questionnaires. That's really important. We've had 10 years of Project Catalyst. We're really keen to get your feedback around what the next 10 years should look like. So your input, your guidance will help us in shaping the project over the coming years. So if you haven't filled in a form, please do so. Your feedback is most welcome and will help us in shaping the project into the future. Trial results. A lot of information presented. We've wanted to run the trial results thematically, so we've heard today around nutrients and water. It's really pleasing, I think, to see that there's a lot of interest in the trials that we're doing. And it's also very promising to see some of the results which are coming from those trials. I've been listening intently to the questions and some of the responses. The thing which strikes me about it is that some of these trials are going to really be long dated. 1 year's results doesn't necessarily tell us much. It might be an anomaly. It's really important that we can run these trials for some period of time to get some meaningful results out of that. So I'd particularly like to thank the growers who have given up their time and their land for these trials, the session MCs, and John Markley for doing his summing up. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank all of the Project Catalyst sponsors. We wouldn't be able to run this event if we didn't have the sponsors, and without them we wouldn't be able to meet annually like we do. So I hope you will join me in thanking the project sponsors, or the forum sponsors. It's really important that you've come on board, and I hope we can continue to have a good working relationship with you. One of the other things you've noted about this forum, which is perhaps a little bit different from previous forums that we've had, is we've been using more videos. And so I'd particularly like to thank Kim Clyden for the work that she's done in doing those videos, and thanking the growers who've been involved in those. I mean, I've watched those. I think they are fantastic communication devices. It helps to tell not just everyone else involved in the project, but a wider audience around what the project is doing. So Kim and everyone at Catchment Solutions, they're fantastic. Job well done. I think hopefully we'll see many more of those in coming years. I'd just like to finish off. We've got drinks tonight. I think that's at 6 o'clock. Is that right, Craig? Drinks at 6. Drinks at 6. Yep. We've also got, and then dinner will be in here at 7:15. So to tomorrow's program. So we are due to be back in here by 8 a.m. So we've got an early start tomorrow. We will finish off the grower presentations, and that will run through to morning tea. And then, as we did last year, we're having a series of breakout groups, and there's a series of topics, 3 breakout groups. You can choose which topic you go into, which breakout group. We're hoping that we can get even numbers across them, so if one looks a bit light on, feel free to join that group. And then you can swap over into do one of the others in the second session, and we'll have a wrap-up of that afterwards. So these are just broad, not issues necessarily related directly to the project, but more broadly to the cane industry, and be very insightful to get your input and feedback during those sessions. Then after lunch, we'll have an update from the project partners, and then we'll have a session on sustainable sugar and the emerging markets for certified sustainable sugar. And then after afternoon tea, have a final wrap-up, a talk about some of the activities and events over the coming year, and a close and we'll talk about where the forum will be next year. So that's a wrap. Thank you very much for your participation today. And drinks will be at 6 o'clock, and look forward to another insightful and interesting day tomorrow. Thank you.